To emphasize the point that a massive elephant rifle is not a good idea, I have a quote from a hunter who used such a rifle and nearly died because of it. Simply put, this weapon was too heavy to be practical, and even with all that weight, the recoil was quite significant. Because of this, he sold the rifle at the first chance he got. The bullets that this weapon fired weighed roughly 3 3/4 ounces, or roughly 1,640 grains. He didn't say exactly what caliber it was, but it's obviously quite large. When a person has heard all their life that large calibers are necessary to kill an elephant, and then they see undeniable proof that such a thing is possible, this can give that person what we call cognitive dissonance. Simply put, it's the uncomfortable feeling you have when you try and reconcile two completely different understandings or beliefs. Some people like Tony Sanchez would like to dismiss W.D.M. Bell's success in killing hundreds of elephants with small caliber rifles as purely luck. Obviously, there's a significant difference between luck and skill. A lucky man might kill a few elephants with an inadequate weapon before he gets killed. Objectively looking at Bell's results, anyone could conclude that Bell was not just lucky, rather that he was skilled and his rifles were effective. Tony Sanchez is not thinking objectively, though. He is experiencing confirmation bias. What he is doing is dismissing certain information so he can keep his existing flawed beliefs. I would also like to point out that Bell didn't kill every animal with small bores, just the vast majority of them. I like to compare large bore rifles to semi-automatic ones chambered in .308 or 7.62 by 51, even though it's generally not legal to hunt elephant with such a caliber. I use these rifles as a benchmark to compare other weapons to because they have not only proven to be effective, but very efficient at killing a large number of elephants humanely in a relatively short period of time. As part of his duties as a game ranger, Bruce Bryden had to kill a large number of elephants to reduce the population. Bruce Bryden explains that the first time they used the R1FAL variant for this, they roughly averaged 1 elephant kill every 4 seconds. I'm not saying such a rifle is the best weapon ever conceived for killing elephants, but rather it's a very good off-the-shelf option for culling elephants and defending yourself from them. In fact, it will handily deal with any lion, rhino, or violent poacher that wants to take your life. I want to also say that back in the olden days, people used to use small but effective calibers like .303 and 7x57 to kill elephants. I'm not suggesting for people to break the law to use smaller calibers. I'm saying that if you are going to have minimum caliber laws, they should be changed to include all effective calibers. Personally, I believe that the idea of minimum caliber laws are fundamentally flawed and that a minimum penetration requirement would be far more useful. The example that immediately comes to mind would be a large caliber like 5.77 Nitro Express failing to kill with a frontal brain shot, but a smaller caliber that is proven to be better at penetrating, like 375 H&H, would easily succeed with such a shot. The obvious downside of such .308 rifles is the lack of appropriate ammunition. Conventional wisdom has convinced many people not to use .308 for elephants, and because of the lack of demand, companies don't make factory ammo loaded with very durable, non-expanding .308 bullets. You could technically use armor-piercing ammunition, but that's not really a good idea because the pointed nose is more likely to deflect than a flat-nose projectile. Cutting-edge bullets does make suitable solid copper flat-nose .308 bullets though, and if you can't get these for whatever reason, it may be possible to make suitable bullets yourself out of hard-cast lead. I don't consider myself informed enough about reloading to go into any great detail, but I do know that with hard-cast lead, you want to keep the velocity on the lower side. As far as I'm concerned, that's not a huge problem, because the heavier bullets reduce velocity as well as increase penetration. To put this into perspective, for elephant culling, a man with a semi-auto FAL would have noticeably more firepower than 2 men with bolt actions. A slightly different method was necessary to make up for the shortcomings of the bolt action 458 Win Mag. It consisted of one man who'd reload one of the 2 rifles, while the shooter shoots the other rifle empty. I want to mention one other thing that I have noticed. Some old-time hunters seem to think that large calibers can make up for poor shot placement. We'll start off with Elmer Keith as an example. Mr. Keith's friend Doc shot a ram lengthwise, but failed to hit anything important. The ram roughly went 3 miles before it died. Elmer Keith used this incident as an example of how the .30-06 was lacking, and this wouldn't have happened with a bigger bullet and a heavier rifle. Since he made this comment, I made sure to include a similar sort of lengthwise shot on an antelope. This antelope was shot with a much larger and heavier bullet, and we have very similar results. The antelope went a few miles before it died. Given such evidence, the obvious question people will ask is, why does Elmer Keith think that a large bullet can be very effective even if you hit nothing important? Obviously, he's not lacking experience in hunting, so the answer seems to be that he can't think critically about the subject due to his existing beliefs. We have a couple more examples I'd like to show you. Commander David Blunt believes the following quote: "There is no doubt with the average shot the big bore rifle is the most humane weapon, for if a vital spot is missed, the quarry will not go far and will most certainly be put out of its pain quickly." Dr. Sutton has a similar view. He believes that the .30-06 is inadequate for African game because people don't always hit the vitals of the animal. Therefore, they need a larger bullet to make up for this. As a side note, Dr. Sutton thinks that the .300 Savage is good, yet the .30-06 is bad. The .300 Savage had the same bullet weight, caliber, and velocity as the .30-06. So we are not talking about a difference of performance, but rather a subjective opinion of performance that doesn't match up to reality. It seems that such beliefs about the superiority of big bore rifles mainly stem from the desire to have shocking power, as Dr. Sutton calls it, or the more common term, stopping power. Both of these terms are misleading, but stopping power is the more misleading one. We have an account of Theodore Roosevelt realizing that the 10-bore double rifle is not actually that good for large game. Despite its reputation for close-range effectiveness in dense jungle, he mentions that the 10-bore lacks accuracy, range, and penetration when compared to the standard .40-90 Sharps and .45 caliber Sharps rifles that Americans use for buffalo. He says that the shock of the 10-bore is not able to make up for such shortcomings. W.D.M. Bell had some insight about the effect of so-called shock on elephants. He specifically mentioned the fact that you can't really kill an elephant with shock unless you hit it with artillery. Both Bell and Roosevelt lived a while ago, and their definition of shock may be different than yours or mine, but what I think they meant is hydrodynamic shock, which is when the bullet indirectly damages the central nervous system by a wave of pressure traveling through the body. Hydrodynamic shock has the ability to instantly immobilize or kill an animal, but this effect is unreliable at best. Regardless of what you call this effect, it is probably impossible or very unlikely for this effect to kill or immediately stop any elephant. Craig Boddington is obviously a big believer in the idea that a large caliber gives you great stopping power. Because of this, he refers to certain rifles as stopping rifles and says they are capable of stopping the largest and most dangerous game. I consider this all to be very misleading. Hydrodynamic shock is unreliable at best, so when you tell someone that a big bore rifle has stopping power, and imply that it can stop a charging buffalo, for example, you are really setting that person up for failure. It's very clear that it's not the rifle that stops the charging buffalo. It's the person behind the rifle that can stay cool-headed enough to place a bullet in the buffalo's brain. It's shot placement that you can bet your life on, not hydrodynamic shock. Craig Boddington should understand when he wrote that book that these so-called stopping rifles fail to live up to their name. He mentions in this book that his friend Ronnie McFarlane shot a lion twice in the throat with non-expanding 500 Nitro Express rounds. The lion was mortally wounded but still able to maul Ronnie. For those of you who say that a large caliber soft point would be a sure charge stopper, I have evidence about why that's not necessarily true either. Tony Tompkinson was a game warden as well as a professional hunter. From his experiences killing large, thick-skinned animals, he found that it was often not caliber or type of rifle that gave you good performance, but rather bullet weight and design. They used a variety of rifles, and regardless of caliber, animals with heart or lung shots tended to travel 75 to 200 yards before becoming immobilized. Only when the spine or brain was destroyed did the animals die immediately. To reiterate, people can call large-bore rifles stopping rifles all they like, but it won't make it true. Because bad angles were somewhat inevitable, they chose calibers that gave excellent penetration. It was for this reason that they used 220 grain full metal jacket 30-06 rounds for headshots during the daytime, and 375 H&H full metal jackets for body shots during nighttime. Presumably, the nighttime shots were under less ideal circumstances because it's nighttime, obviously, and that you would need to use a body shot instead of a more precise and effective headshot. The 458 Win Mag was his second choice for body shots during nighttime, and he also mentions that he uses a 458 lot loaded with solids for dangerous game now. Some people will obviously notice that I haven't mentioned rounds of old that allegedly had some of the greatest stopping power, such as the 4-bore and the 8-bore rifles. The problem is that none of these cartridges can reliably, physically stop a charging animal without a brain or spine shot. This is not a matter of opinion, as I have a case where a charging buffalo took an 8-bore bullet right through the heart with no immediate effect. The charge was not stopped, and a man very nearly lost his life. This wasn't the only 8-bore round that was fired into this bull. In fact, it was shot with a 4-bore rifle as well, with little effect. This buffalo got very close during this ordeal, and was close to trampling and goring a man to death. Needless to say, a very large and powerful bullet can produce hydrodynamic shock, but it can't be relied upon to stop a charging buffalo unless it hits the brain or spine. We've got some more real-world 4-bore use. We have both the Cape buffalo and an elephant that were killed with a 4-bore. The buffalo took at least 1 minute and 17 seconds to die from a shot that went through the shoulder and into the chest. The elephant was shot twice in the heart and went down in 36 seconds after the first shot was fired. In comparison, I have a bunch of different Cape buffalo and one water buffalo shot with calibers smaller than 4-bore. All of them died in a shorter amount of time. The point I'm making is that when you have a really powerful 4-bore rifle, that huge 95 caliber bullet doesn't really guarantee a quick kill even if you hit the heart or lungs. Obviously, you can see that some of the smaller calibers used on these Cape buffalo are all quite powerful as well, many of them being 375 caliber. This matters somewhat, but not much as you might think it does. I have covered this point to some degree in my Does Caliber Matter video, but it seems that animals of any kind can die fairly quickly regardless if they are shot with rifle bullets or handgun bullets. Max Prazik has killed both a Cape buffalo and a water buffalo with a 500 JRH revolver. Razor Dobbs has also killed a Cape buffalo with a 10mm handgun. In the scenario where your rifle is hopelessly jammed or otherwise out of commission, an immediately available handgun loaded with the proper ammunition can mean the difference between life and death. When I state that all animals can die quickly, regardless of whether they are hit with large or small calibers, people seem to want to make an exception for this rule for elephants. W.D.M. Bell noticed that elephants that were shot with the 275 Rigby died just as fast as when they were shot with the larger 450-400 Nitro Express, so it's quite clear that elephants are no exception to this rule. He also noticed that 2 simultaneously fired shots from the 400 rifle were not any more effective than a single shot from the 275 or the 256. He also specifically mentioned that even with the small 256 caliber bullets, a shot to the elephant's heart or lungs would be fatal. While Stewart Edward White was hunting, he took note of how many rounds he fired and how many animals those rounds killed. For both 30-06 and 405 Winchester, it was roughly 2 hits before the animal was killed. I want to specify that he hunted dangerous game, lions for example, with both these rifles. So we can say with real-world use, a smaller caliber like 30-06 can kill just as fast as a larger caliber, and requires the same amount of rounds on average to kill as a larger caliber does. By the way, the reason why there are so many more kills with the 30-06 was because its lightweight and greater range made it generally better for hunting. I have to mention one more thing. Occasionally on Cape Buffalo, you'll have a situation where lung shots with non-expanding rounds of both large and small calibers are not particularly effective. This is one of the reasons that your first round should always be an expanding bullet when hunting buffalo. This situation happened with a Cape buffalo that was shot through both lungs with a .416 Rigby, and the buffalo was found alive 48 hours and 20 miles later. I thought I should add the story about the 8.68 Full Metal Jackets as well because it seems similar, even if it didn't mention where all the rounds hit. Some people point to the death of George Gray as an example of why small caliber rifles are totally inadequate for dangerous game. George Gray shot a charging lion in the jaw with a 145 grain .280 Ross bullet. Due to poor construction, this bullet totally fragmented. The lion then mauled George Gray, who later died because of these wounds. Sir Alfred Pease was there at the time, and consequently gave a good account of what happened. This is just his abbreviated version. Obviously the .280 bullet failed, not the cartridge. It's also quite obvious that a large caliber rifle with a well-constructed bullet would still just break the lion's jaw, and not stop the charging lion from killing you. I have a real-world example of just this happening. A lion was shot in the mouth with a cartridge referred to as 400 cordite. The lion wasn't particularly fazed by this, and thankfully no one was badly hurt or killed. Some people may still have some lingering doubts. Surely large caliber bullets can't fail as badly to kill as the high velocity .280 Ross did. To eliminate any doubt about this subject, we have a couple examples of large bullets completely failing to kill. John Kingsley Heath wounded a lion, then shot it in the head twice with poorly constructed .470 rounds. These rounds had, quote, erratic bullet performance and totally failed to kill the lion. Mr. Kingsley Heath was badly mauled, but did survive. We have another example where a .489 caliber 500 grain bullet deflected off the head of a lion and was consequently useless. This was actually the second round he fired. The first shot being a .256 Mannlicher that hit the teeth and neck but nothing important. What actually killed the lion was the third shot, a quote small bullet put accurately in the brain.